Long before the jingle of coins filled pockets and purses, the story of money in Norway was written in silver. This was a land shaped by the sea, by longships cutting through the gray waters of the North Atlantic. The Vikings, those masters of the waves, didn't deal in neat round coins from a royal mint. Theirs was a more direct, a more visceral connection to wealth. They valued silver not for the face stamped upon it, but for its raw, hefty reality. It was a currency of weight, of substance. You could feel its worth in the palm of your hand, a satisfying heaviness that spoke of long journeys, of trade, and sometimes, of plunder. This was the age of hack silver. Imagine a Viking trader, his hands calloused from the oar and the rope. He has returned from a voyage to the east, perhaps to the bustling markets of Miklagard, what we now call Istanbul. His pouch doesn't contain coins but a jumble of silver objects, a piece of a bracelet, a fragment of a silver dish, a foreign coin chopped into pieces. This is hack silver. When he wanted to buy a new axe or a barrel of grain, he would place his silver on a small, portable scale. The merchant on the other side would do the same with his goods. It was a transaction based on pure, unadulterated weight. The silver was often marked with tiny nicks and cuts, little tests to prove it wasn't just a worthless metal plated in silver. It was a raw and honest system. Alongside this chopped-up treasure, foreign coins did find their way into Norway. They washed ashore with the tides of trade and conflict. You might find Arabic dirhams, their elegant script a testament to vast trading networks that stretched across continents. You might find Anglo-Saxon pennies, bearing the portraits of kings from a green and pleasant land across the sea. Or you could find German pfennigs, solid and dependable. But these were not used as we use coins today. They weren't valued for being 1 penny or 1 dirham. They were just more silver, tossed into the melting pot, or rather the chopping block, to be valued by weight alone. For centuries, this was the rhythm of the Norwegian economy. This system worked well enough for big transactions. You could buy a farm, a boat, or a herd of cattle with a hefty bag of silver. But what about the small things? What about buying a loaf of bread, a handful of dried fish, or a cup of ale? For the everyday person, the sheer value of silver made small purchases incredibly difficult. You couldn't just chop a tiny sliver off a silver ingot every time you needed something small. This was a world without small change. It was a gap in the fabric of daily life, a problem that wouldn't be solved for hundreds of years. The age of copper, the age of the common coin, was still a long way off. The world of hack silver and traded bullion was the world of chieftains and sea kings. But as the Viking Age waned, something new began to take shape in the fjords and valleys of Norway. The idea of a single kingdom, united under one powerful ruler, was taking hold. And with that idea came the need for symbols of that power. One of the most potent symbols a king could wield was his own money. It was a way of stamping his authority, his very image, onto the land and its people. This monumental shift happened around the year 995, with a king whose name echoes through Norwegian history, Olaf Tryggvason. He was the first to mint coins in Norway. These were not the humble copper coins of later years. Not at all. These first Norwegian coins, known as penning, were made of silver, the metal of prestige and power. King Olaf was asserting his place among the great rulers of Europe. He was showing that Norway was no longer just a collection of warring tribes, but a unified Christian kingdom with all the trappings of a modern state. Minting his own coins was a declaration. It said, "This land is mine. This economy is mine. My face, my name, my cross, guarantees the value of this metal." It was a profound statement, struck in shining silver. Olaf likely brought the know-how and the craftsmen with him from England, where he had spent time before claiming the Norwegian throne. The design of these early pennies is telling. They closely mirrored the Anglo-Saxon coins of the time. On one side, you would typically see a portrait of the king. On the other, a long cross, a powerful symbol of the new Christian faith that was supplanting the old Norse gods. The coins were small, thin, and made of good silver. They were a tangible link between the king, the church, and the growing economy of the kingdom. They were more than just money. They were propaganda you could hold in your hand. But even with the arrival of royal coinage, the old ways died hard. For a long time, these new Norwegian pennies circulated alongside the familiar hack silver and the jumble of foreign coins. People still trusted the weight of the metal in their hand. It would take centuries for the idea of a coin's face value to fully take root. More importantly, these silver pennies were still too valuable for most everyday purchases. The problem of small change remained. A farmer couldn't easily use a silver penning to buy a small amount of salt. The great economic divide persisted, silver for the wealthy and the powerful, and barter or credit for everyone else. The journey towards a currency for all had begun, but it was far from over. The Middle Ages unfolded, and Norway's story became intertwined with its powerful neighbors. The union with Denmark, starting in the late 14th century, changed the course of the nation's history. For centuries, Norway would be the junior partner in a relationship governed from Copenhagen. This political reality was reflected in the coins that circulated in the country. While Norwegian mints like the one in Bergen did operate from time to time, the coinage was increasingly dominated by Danish issues. The kings, ruling from Denmark, saw little need to develop a unique monetary system for their northern territory. The focus remained squarely on silver. Throughout this long period, from the 1300s to the 1600s, the monetary system was stubbornly resistant to change. The primary coins were the silver speculator and its smaller silver fractions. These were large, impressive coins, the currency of international trade, of merchants, ship owners, and the state. They were essential for paying taxes, for buying land, and for funding the grand projects of the Danish-Norwegian crown. But they were utterly impractical for the vast majority of the population. A fisherman selling his catch at the market, or a farmer's wife needing to buy thread, had no use for a coin that was worth more than their entire stock. The lack of small denomination coins created a huge headache for daily life. How did people manage? They relied on a complex web of barter, credit, and tokens. A farmer might trade a sack of potatoes for a length of cloth. A laborer might work for a week and be paid in food and lodging, with a small amount of silver credited to his name in the merchant's ledger. In some towns, merchants and landowners issued their own private tokens, little pieces of lead or leather that could be exchanged for goods at their own stores. But this was a messy, inefficient system. It was localized, it was confusing, and it put ordinary people at the mercy of powerful merchants. This was a monetary system with a missing piece. It was like a machine with all its big gears turning, but lacking the tiny cogs that make everything run smoothly. The great wheels of state finance and international trade kept spinning with silver, but the small everyday transactions that form the bedrock of an economy were grinding along with difficulty. The need for a low-value, official coin was becoming painfully obvious, but the crown in Copenhagen, focused on the prestige and profit of silver, was slow to see it. For the common person in Norway, the long wait for a currency they could actually use in their daily lives continued. By the 17th century, the world was changing, and the pressure on Norway's silver-only economy was becoming immense. The old system was cracking under the strain of new demands. One of the biggest drivers of this change was trade. Commerce was no longer just about shiploads of timber or barrels of fish traded for silver bullion. Smaller-scale trade was growing. More people were living in towns, working for wages, and needing to buy things every day. The cumbersome system of barter and credit was becoming a serious obstacle to economic growth. A modern economy needed a modern currency, one that could handle transactions both large and small. The lack of small change was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a bottleneck. At the same time, the supply of silver itself was becoming a problem. Wars, especially the costly conflicts Denmark-Norway fought with Sweden, drained the royal treasury. Silver was needed to pay soldiers and build fortresses. There simply wasn't enough of the precious metal to go around, and what was available was reserved for large denomination coins like the speculator. Mints across Europe were facing the same dilemma. The answer, they found, was copper. It was cheap, it was abundant, and it was perfect for making the low-value coins that people desperately needed for their daily shopping. Sweden, Norway's great rival, had already embraced copper coinage on a massive scale, powered by its huge copper mine at Falun. This brings us to a crucial discovery deep within the Norwegian mountains. In 1623, a rich seam of silver was found at Sandsvær, leading to the founding of the mining town of Kongsberg and the establishment of the Royal Norwegian Mint there. But Kongsberg was not just about silver. The mining operations also unearthed something else: copper, not in the same vast quantities as in Sweden, but enough. Suddenly, Norway had its own domestic source of the very metal it needed to solve its small change problem. The raw material was right there, waiting to be dug out of the Norwegian rock. The final piece of the puzzle was political will. The influence from Copenhagen was decisive. King Christian V, ruler of both Denmark and Norway, saw what was happening in other European kingdoms. He saw the economic sense in introducing copper coins. It would make trade more efficient, make it easier to collect small taxes, and it would stretch the kingdom's limited silver reserves. It was a practical solution to a long-standing problem. The decision was made. The time had come for Norway to finally step out of the shadow of its silver-only past. The stage was set. The metal was available. The need was undeniable. A new chapter in Norwegian history was about to be struck in humble, reddish-brown copper. The year is 1683. At the Royal Mint in Kongsberg, a place that had been established to turn Norwegian silver into royal currency, a different kind of sound is heard. It's the sound of a new beginning. Under the authority of King Christian V of Denmark and Norway, the Mint strikes the nation's very first official copper coin. This wasn't a grand, showy piece of silver meant for wealthy merchants. This was something new, something for the people. It was the one skilling dansk coin. Its creation marked a quiet revolution in the daily lives of Norwegians, a moment when the monarchy finally provided a tool for the common economy. Let's look closer at this little piece of history. The coin was not large, designed to be practical for everyday use. On one side, the obverse, it bore the crowned monogram of the king, a C5 insignia, intricately designed. Above the monogram sat the royal crown, a clear symbol of the source of its authority. Around the edge, the king's motto, Pietate et Justitia, with piety and justice, was inscribed. This was the king placing his personal stamp, his guarantee, on this humble piece of copper. He was declaring that this coin, despite its low intrinsic value, was legitimate currency of the realm. Turn the coin over to its reverse side. Here, the story continues. The central design is dominated by the value of the coin. 1 skilling dansk, with the date, 1683, clearly stamped below. This was crucial. For the first time, a coin's worth was explicitly written on it in plain language. You didn't need a set of scales to know its value. The inscription confirmed its place within the Danish-Norwegian monetary system, where 96 skilling equaled 1 spesidaler. The coin also bore a mint mark, a crossed hammer and pickaxe, the symbol of the Kongsberg Silver Works, a proud declaration of its Norwegian origin. It was made of pure copper, mined from the mountains right there in Norway. When these coins first entered circulation, they must have felt like a revelation. A laborer could now receive his day's wages in a handful of tangible coins, not just a mark in a ledger. He could go to the market and buy a small portion of fish or a piece of bread without the hassle of barter. For the first time, the state had provided a means for the poor to participate directly in the cash economy. It was a small step, but a profoundly important one. This little copper coin connected the grand politics of the king in Copenhagen to the simple, everyday needs of a fisherman in Bergen or a farmer in a remote valley. It was more than metal, it was a link. The introduction of the 1683 copper skilling was like opening a floodgate. The coin was so successful and met such a clear need that it was only the beginning. As the 18th century dawned, the mint at Kongsberg, and later the mint in Copenhagen, began producing copper coins in ever-increasing numbers. The single 1 skilling coin was soon joined by other denominations. There were 2 skilling pieces and even smaller half-skilling coins, providing even more flexibility for tiny transactions. Copper was no longer a novelty. It was fast becoming the workhorse of the Norwegian economy. The jingle of copper became a common sound in towns and villages across the land. This flood of copper had a profound effect on daily life. Marketplaces became more dynamic. Small-scale producers, craftsmen, fishermen, farmers with a small surplus, could now easily sell their goods for cash. This spurred local economies and encouraged small enterprise. Wages for laborers were increasingly paid in coin, giving workers more freedom to choose how they spent their money. The state also benefited. It was now far easier to collect small taxes and fees from the general population, which in turn helped to fund the kingdom's administration and its military. The copper coin was lubricating the gears of society, from the highest levels of government down to the most humble household. However, this new reliance on copper was not without its problems. The key challenge was inflation. Because copper coins were token money, their metallic value was much lower than their stamped face value. There was a constant temptation for the state to overproduce them. During times of war or economic hardship, the government would often crank up the mints, churning out vast quantities of copper coins to pay its bills. This devalued the currency. People found that their handful of skilling coins bought less and less. This led to public mistrust and economic instability, a recurring theme throughout the 18th century. Throughout this period, Norway's monetary policy was still firmly controlled from Denmark. The decisions about how many coins to mint and of what value were made in Copenhagen, based on the needs of the entire dual monarchy, not just Norway. Often what was good for Denmark was not necessarily good for Norway. This created a sense of economic dependency and sometimes resentment. The copper coins that filled Norwegian pockets were a constant reminder that, while they were made from Norwegian copper and used by Norwegian people, the ultimate authority over their value lay across the sea. The copper currency was both a blessing for daily life and a symbol of subordination. The year 1814 was a whirlwind of change for Norway. The Napoleonic Wars redrew the map of Europe, and the centuries-long union with Denmark was dissolved. For a brief, hopeful moment, Norway declared its independence, adopted a new constitution, and looked forward to a future as a sovereign nation. This dream was short-lived, as the country was soon forced into a new union, this time with Sweden. But the spirit of 1814 was never lost. Norway now had its own constitution and a much greater degree of self-governance. One of the first tasks for the newly assertive nation was to establish its own independent monetary system. The new system was based on a silver coin called the spekkie dollar, just like before, but this was now a Norwegian spekkie dollar. It was divided into 120 skilling, a slight change from the old Danish system. And of course, these new skilling needed to be minted. Copper would once again play a vital role. The mint at Kongsberg, now serving a Norwegian government, began striking new copper coins, 1 skilling, 2 skilling, and half skilling pieces. These coins were symbols of a new era. They looked different from their Danish-Norwegian predecessors. They proudly bore the Norwegian coat of arms, a crowned lion clutching an axe. These new Norwegian copper coins were a source of national pride. They were a tangible, everyday expression of Norway's new status. While still ruled by a Swedish king, the country had its own laws, its own parliament, the Storting, and now its own distinct currency. For the person on the street, this was the most visible sign of the change. The money in their pocket was no longer Danish, it was unequivocally Norwegian. This helped to forge a new sense of national identity in the decades following 1814. Using these coins for daily transactions was a small but constant affirmation of Norway's unique place in the world. The 19th century was a period of significant economic development for Norway. Industry began to grow, infrastructure was built, and the population expanded. Throughout all this, the copper skilling remained the backbone of small-scale commerce. It was the currency of the corner shop, the farm laborer, and the factory worker. The government in Christiania, now Oslo, carefully managed the minting of these coins, having learned the hard lessons about inflation from the previous century. The copper coinage of this era was generally stable and trusted, providing a solid foundation for the growing economy of a nation finding its feet. The mid-19th century was an age of science and industrial progress, and this extended even to the metals used for coinage. For all its usefulness, pure copper had its drawbacks. It was a relatively soft metal, meaning that coins wore down quickly in circulation. The intricate details of the king's monogram or the national coat of arms could become smooth and unreadable after years of passing from hand to hand. Copper also tarnished easily, turning from a bright, reddish-brown to a dull, dark color. Mints across the world were experimenting with new alloys to create more durable and attractive coins. The solution they found was bronze. Bronze, an alloy of copper, tin, and zinc, proved to be a superior metal for coinage. It was harder than pure copper, so the coins lasted much longer. This meant the designs remained sharp and clear for decades, reducing the cost and effort of having to constantly replace worn-out currency. Bronze also had a more stable and attractive color, and it was more resistant to corrosion. For governments and mints, the switch was a logical step forward. It represented efficiency, durability, and modernity. The age of pure copper coinage was drawing to a close. The big change for Norway came in 1875. The country decided to abandon its old spesideler system and join the Scandinavian Monetary Union, alongside Denmark and Sweden. This was a major reform, aligning Norway with the gold standard and a new decimal currency system. The new unit of currency was the krone, divided into 100 øre. This marked the definitive end of the skilling, a coin that had served Norway for nearly 200 years. The new system required new coins, and for the low-value denominations, the 1, 2, and 5 øre pieces, the chosen metal was bronze. The last pure copper skilling coins had been minted a few years earlier. With the introduction of the bronze øre coins in 1875, the era that began in 1683 was officially over. The old copper coins were gradually withdrawn from circulation, replaced by their tougher, shinier bronze successors. People would have returned their old worn copper skillings to the bank, exchanging them for the new krone and øre. The sound of Norwegian pockets began to change, as the soft clink of copper was replaced by the slightly sharper ring of bronze. The humble copper coin, which had been a revolutionary innovation, had now been superseded by technology. A faithful servant retired after a long and useful life. Today, the 1683 1 skilling coin is no longer a tool of commerce. You cannot use it to buy a coffee or a newspaper. Its life as money is long over, but its life as a historical artifact, as a symbol, is more powerful than ever. These coins are the survivors of a bygone age. They are tiny metal messengers from the past, connecting us directly to the world of 17th century Norway. Each surviving coin is a piece of history you can hold in the palm of your hand, a tangible link to the dawn of a monetary system for the common person. They are treasured by collectors and preserved in museums. For numismatists, coin collectors, the 1683 1 skilling is a landmark piece. It represents a crucial turning point in the monetary history of Scandinavia. Finding a well-preserved example is a goal for many who collect Norwegian or Danish coins. They study its design, the clarity of the strike, the quality of the copper, and the small variations that make each coin unique. These collectors are the custodians of the coin's physical legacy, carefully preserving these pieces for future generations. Their passion keeps the story of the coin alive, ensuring it is not forgotten or lost to time. In museums like the University of Oslo's coin cabinet, the 1683 skilling is displayed with reverence. It is placed in its proper context, telling the story of King Christian V, the Kongsberg Mint, and the great economic shift it represented. It serves as an educational tool, teaching schoolchildren and visitors about a time when money was not something to be taken for granted. It illustrates the long and difficult journey towards the convenient monetary system we use today. It sits behind glass, no longer a simple coin, but a piece of national heritage, a testament to Norway's economic and social development. The significance of this first copper coin goes beyond its metallic value or its rarity. It represents the moment when the state acknowledged the economic life of ordinary people. It was the beginning of financial inclusion in Norway. Before this coin, the official currency was the exclusive domain of the rich. Afterwards, everyone could participate. It helped to build the modern Norwegian economy from the ground up. The story of this humble coin is a powerful reminder that history is not just made by kings and battles, but also by the small, everyday objects that shape the lives of everyone. It was, and remains, a coin of the people.